So next, coming to the time spent on each section. Now again, this is something that most of you are already following, I believe. But let us see how much time can be spent on each section as such. Now, clearly, English, which constitutes about 20%, you have around 28 to 32 questions, right? An ideal time for this section would be around 20 to 25 minutes, not more than that, right? Current affairs, again, like I said, even with respect to the passages, even though it is passage based right now, still it remains one of the least time consuming sections with respect as compared to all others. So you can, plan to give in around 12 to 15 minutes to this section. A few minutes here and there is okay, that is for all the sections. But current affairs, more or less, since you're not going to read the passages really thoroughly that much, 10 to 15 minutes or 12 to 15 minutes would be a decent enough time that you can allot to your current affairs section. Next, coming to the legal reasoning section, probably yes, current affairs and legal are one of your two of your biggest sections basically. But luckily, current affairs is very less time consuming. Legal, on the other hand, is an important section, is a big section, as well as automatically the time that you allot to legal will also be the highest among all, right? So roughly around 35 to 40 minutes would be a decent enough time that you can give to this section, given that it has close to 40 questions out of your paper, right? Coming to logical, it is very similar to English in terms of the number of questions as well as the amount of time that you allocate for that, right? So again, around 20 to 25 minutes should be a reasonable time that you give to this section, right? So even with respect to the order that I was just talking, so whether you choose to do English first or logical first, in terms of the time split, you would still be done with one section within the first 20-25 minutes. And if you plan to do GK next, then probably in the first 40 minutes or so, 35-40 minutes, you should be done with two sections for sure, right? Coming to the last section and probably the one with the least number of questions and least weightage, which is going to be your quant, you can choose to probably give it around 15 minutes, not more than that. Now, a lot of times you've seen that students usually, at least CLAT aspirants usually, are not so comfortable with this section as such. Again, I'm not talking about everyone as such, but mostly this is what we have seen, that not everyone is so comfortable with this section. But remember, at the same time, do not get into the situation of leaving out this entire section. That is definitely not advisable, right? So ensure you're allotting at least 10 to 15 minutes, not more than 15 minutes. Definitely that is also not worth it, because even if you're allotting too much time, at the end of the day, you're only going to solve 15 questions on an average, right? So it's not like allotting more time is going to benefit you in any way, right? So ensure that you stick to 15-16 minutes at the most. But at the same time, do ensure that you're not skipping out this section entirely. Ensure that you're giving at least 10 to 12 minutes, so that at least you can take a look at the questions and attempt some of them for sure. Right. So roughly speaking, if you see this 25 minutes for logical and English, 35 to 40 for legal, and 15 minutes approximately each for current affairs and quant. Overall, if you see, it adds up to around um, 5 minutes extra. 5 minutes is left off. It adds up to around 115 minutes. But yeah, 5 minutes here and there can always be adjusted, maybe because you took a little extra time in legal, or maybe because you took a little extra time in current affairs. Those 5 minutes can always be adjusted in any of the sections, right? So overall, this is the suggested timeline, and we advise you to stick to these times as much as possible, right? Because giving too much to any section, even if English you end up spending 40 minutes or something like that, that's really going to throw you off with respect to your time that is left for other sections, right? So ensure that you are, as much as possible, you try to stick to this suggested timelines, right? Now, with these two things out of the way, let us get into the UCLAT mock and understand how the mock was, how were the sections with respect to easy, medium, difficult, and what could have been good scores that you should have gotten in this mock, right? So for every section, we'll do an analysis in three types, as in one would be in terms of the types of question that you got, right, which is what you have on screen here. One is with respect to the level of difficulty of the questions, which we'll see next. And the third one would be in terms of the passages or the questions that you should have definitely done as against the questions that you could have done or may have skipped, right? So we'll do each subject, we'll look at each subject and we'll do an analysis on these three aspects, right? Now, coming to the English section, if you remember, this is your type of questions, right? Which you have direct questions. Direct questions, I'm sure from RC, direct questions are those factual, information-based questions that you can directly pick from your passage, right? Most of the time, these are your easy questions, so definitely doable ones, right? Inferred are your tricky or difficult question because it needs a little bit of reading and understanding, right? A lot of reasoning is required. So some way similar to your logical reasoning kind of questions. Also, inferred are basically things that would require a little bit of more reading and understanding and reasoning, right? So yes, in that context, definitely more difficult as compared to your direct questions, right? So we had around 12 out of the total 32 questions, nearly 12. So nearly one third, you could say, were around 37%, that is, were around inferred questions, right? Then you had questions, typical questions on vocab and grammar. These are again, grammar could still be easy in the context of from passages. When you're getting grammar based questions, most of the time it is like fill in the blanks with either articles or prepositions, or trying to pick up the correct form of the sentence and all of that, so which is fairly easy enough to do, so not at all difficult. Vocabulary also, since it is from a passage, you can expect to have some sort of a contextual clue from the passage that you can use to answer these questions. It wouldn't be a completely random word whose synonym or antonym is being asked, right? Some sort of a hint might be in the passage, might be given in the passage, but makes it a little okay and easy to attempt these kinds of questions, right? And there were around 6 questions that were two each. I think there was a title based question, main idea, and tone based questions. So these were with respect to the type of questions that you had in the paper. So like I said, mostly inferred, yes, out of the total 32, if you see 12 inferred, difficult, a little tricky, difficult, but the others, right, but the remaining were definitely doable ones, right, not at all difficult in that context. So 20 questions were clearly doable. Out of the 12 also, I'm sure inferred you would have been able to do quite a few of them, right? Now let us take a look at the section with respect to the level of difficulty. So if you see, there were nearly 19 questions which were easy. Now, if you remember in the previous slide, we just said that close to 20 questions, belong to the direct vocab or grammar kind of category, and there were around 12 which were inferred, right? So consequently, you see that there are around 19 questions which you can categorize at easy, right? So out of 32, if 19 questions are easy, this section I would say overall would definitely be an easy one, right? Easy to moderate is the best, but yeah, more towards easy this section was. There was hardly any or just one question which can be categorized as difficult, but remaining 12 were all medium level questions, which might have been, most of those might have been your inference based questions, right? So we understand that the section overall was definitely on the easier side. So you could have scored really well in this, which we will probably look at the end of the analysis. Now, coming to the passages, if you see, if you remember, we'll just quickly go through passages that you should have definitely attempted versus what you could have attempted. Now, when I say you can attempt or you could have skipped, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily skip the passage. That is definitely what we are trying, not what we are trying to say. But it's something like depending on the time, if you were running short of time or something like that, this was a passage which you could have skipped or you could have attempted at the end. Right? That is what is meant by can attempt passages. Again, one more thing to note about can attempt kind of passages is even though you leave out or do not read the passage as such, ensure you do a quick check of the questions at least to see if you have any direct vocabulary based or grammar based questions which you can do right away without having to read the passage, right? So even if you are, let us say, leaving out a passage, ensure you do not leave it out without reading the questions, because you never know, at least 2 questions, one, two, three, any number of questions you might be able to attempt without actually doing much of a reading, right? Now, coming to the must attempt passages, if you see the first passage, which was based on life insurance and savings scheme, very, very straightforward, all easy questions. This is something that all of you should have done. The second one was on Johnson and his religious views. It was also an easy read kind of a passage, easy conversational style passage. So definitely something that should have been done. The third passage, if you remember, was something about selection criteria of Nobel Peace Prize. Now, this passage, I would say, yes, it did require a little bit of reading, careful reading, but with that, you should have been able to attempt the questions fairly easily. Questions were really doable, but yes, a little bit of careful reading was needed, right? If I remember, like the level of questions also were like there were couple of easy questions, couple of medium questions, and one difficult question, right? So yes, you could have definitely attempted this passage for sure. The fourth one passage was based on, I think, budget allocation to states and all. This was a factual or information based passage. Again, fairly straightforward questions you could have definitely done. Passage 6 was an interesting read actually. Simple questions, interesting read. The topic was interesting, but you have to be careful not to get too carried away with the topics that are given in the passage. You have to be quick in reading, understanding, solving the questions, and moving on. But yeah, passage 6 was also something that could have been easily done. Passage 5, if you remember, it was on the effects of pandemic. Now, it is a contemporary topic, so it is not something new that you are unaware of, but that was a passage which needed really careful and thorough reading, right? So in that context, in case you were running short of time, this was a passage that you could have left off or maybe done only a few questions from it. Now, when I say must attempt passages also, it is very much possible that a few questions in those passages could have been difficult, which you can choose to skip. It's not like must attempt passages, you have to attempt all the questions, even though if you're unsure about it, that's not the point. So just like you can leave out some questions from the must attempt passages, same way you can attempt a few questions from the can or skipping kind of passages as well, right? So on the whole, if you see, 5 passages out of the 6 were definitely doable. The sixth one, depending on your time and comfort, you may or may not have done it, right? Moving on to the next section, that is current affairs. Current affairs, if you clearly see, we are all aware of these buckets, the most common buckets that we all talk about. 8 buckets we have in current affairs that we broadly divide it. So polity and government, you had one set. International, you had one set. Culture, I think you had 2 sets of questions. Then there was one set on business, one on defense, and one on science and tech. So overall, if you have to see clearly, culture was something that you had more. I think 2 sets were there on culture-based questions, but otherwise, the overall split of the buckets or categories was more or less across different topics, right?